The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Consual Senate for only 87 years. It was not a long time when compared to species that had traveled between stars for thousands of years. Humans were still seen as newcomers, as children who had barely learned to walk among the ancient civilizations of the galaxy. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of his ship, the USS Defiance. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the nervous breathing of his crew. Everyone was watching the large holographic screen that floated in the center of the room. On the screen was a live transmission from the Senate chambers on a distant world called Valaxis Prime. The chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from 12 different alien species. Some had scales, others had tentacles, and some looked like nothing humans had ever imagined. But all of them were focused on one figure standing at the center podium. His name was High Chancellor Zorvith, and he was the leader of the Thalaxian Dominion. The Thalaxians were tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes that showed no warmth. They had been the dominant power in the galaxy for over 2,000 years, and they did not like competition. Zorvith spoke in a cold voice that echoed through the chamber and across the transmission to every human ship and colony. He said that the Galactic Senate had reached a decision regarding the human species. After careful study and debate, they had determined that humanity posed a threat to galactic peace and stability. Admiral Carter felt his hands tighten into fists as he listened. The High Chancellor continued. He said that humans were too violent, too aggressive, and too dangerous to be trusted with military power. Their history was filled with wars against each other, and now they were building weapons that could threaten even the oldest civilizations. This could not be allowed to continue. Therefore, the Senate had issued a decree. Humanity had 90 standard days to surrender all of their warships. They had to dismantle their planetary defense systems. They had to close all weapons factories and military academies. And they had to accept permanent demilitarized status under Senate supervision. If humanity refused, the combined fleets of all 12 Senate species would take action. There would be no negotiation. There would be no mercy. The transmission ended, and the holographic screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. Then Lieutenant Amy Richards, the communications officer, broke the silence. She asked if the Senate could really do this. She asked if they could just order humanity to give up everything. Admiral Carter did not answer. He simply stared at the empty screen and thought about what was coming. Thousands of light years away on Earth, President Larva Mitchell received the same transmission in her office at the United Earth Council headquarters. She was a woman in her 60s with short white hair and sharp brown eyes. She had led humanity through difficult times before, but nothing like this. She called an emergency meeting of her advisors. Within an hour, the most powerful people on Earth had gathered in a secure room deep beneath the government building. Secretary of Defense Kevin Price was there, along with military commanders, intelligence officers, and diplomatic staff. Kevin Price was the first to speak. He was a large man with a serious face and a voice that commanded attention. He presented the intelligence his people had gathered about the Senate fleet. The numbers were not good. The combined alien forces had over 3,000 warships. Humanity had less than 200. Even with better technology, they could not win a direct fight. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Then the door opened, and Ambassador Nathan Cole walked in. He had just returned from Valaxis Prime, and he had more information that the Senate had not shared publicly. Nathan Cole was a slim man with glasses and a calm manner that hid a sharp mind. He had served as humanity's voice in the Senate for 15 years, and he knew the alien politicians better than anyone. He told the president that this was not really about peace or stability. It was about greed. He explained that human explorers had recently discovered a vast deposit of quantum crystals in the outer regions of their territory. These crystals were the most valuable substance in the galaxy because they powered faster than light engines. The Thalaxians had learned about this discovery, and they wanted those crystals for themselves. Disarming humanity was just the first step. Once humans could no longer defend themselves, the Thalaxians would find an excuse to take their worlds one by one. The other Senate species would get small shares to keep them happy, but the Thalaxians would control everything. President Mitchell listened carefully to every word. When Nathan finished, she asked him one more question. She asked if there was any way to negotiate, any way to find a peaceful solution. Nathan shook his head slowly. He said he had tried. He had spent years building relationships with other species, looking for allies, trying to find common ground. But the Thalaxians had too much power, and the other species were too afraid to oppose them. Humanity stood alone. The president turned to look out the window at the city below. Millions of people were going about their daily lives, unaware that their future hung in the balance. She thought about the generations who had come before her, the countless humans who had fought and sacrificed so that their children could reach the stars. She thought about her own grandchildren, who dreamed of exploring distant worlds and meeting alien civilizations. What kind of future would they have under Thalaxian control? Finally, she turned back to face her advisors. Her eyes were hard, and her voice was steady. She said that humanity's ancestors had faced impossible odds many times throughout history. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But they had never surrendered their freedom without a fight. She asked one simple question. Were they going to be the generation that broke that tradition? The answer came quickly and unanimously from everyone in the room. No, they would not surrender. They would not bow. They would find a way to fight. Kevin Price nodded and said he would begin preparing their defenses immediately. Nathan Cole said he would return to the Senate and buy them as much time as possible. The others started discussing strategies, resources, and possibilities. President Mitchell watched them work and felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt hope, not because victory was certain, but because humanity was refusing to give up. That had always been their greatest strength. The clock had started. They had 90 days to prepare for a war that could end their civilization. But for the first time since the transmission began, Admiral Carter and President Mitchell and everyone else fighting for humanity shared the same thought. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humans too far. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, there was a place that did not exist on any map. No government record mentioned it. No satellite could see it. Even the President of Earth had only learned about it 3 days ago, when the Senate issued their ultimatum. Dr. Samantha Wright walked through the long, underground corridors with a flashlight in her hand. The lights had been off for 40 years, and the backup power was only now coming online. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled old and forgotten. Behind her walked Admiral Daniel Carter and General Beth Morrison. The general was a tough woman with short gray hair and scars on her face from battles long past. She commanded all of Earth's ground forces, and she had never been afraid of anything. But as they walked deeper into this forgotten facility, even she felt a chill run down her spine. Dr. Wright was a small woman with curly brown hair and bright green eyes. She was one of the few people alive who knew what was hidden in these tunnels. Her father had worked here decades ago, and he had passed a secret to her before he died. She stopped in front of a massive steel door and placed her hand on a scanner. The machine hummed, recognized her genetic code, and the door slowly opened with a grinding sound. The room beyond was enormous. It stretched for hundreds of meters in every direction, filled with rows upon rows of metal containers, weapon systems. and machines that looked like something from a nightmare. Admiral Carter asked what they were looking at. Dr. Wright took a deep breath and began to explain. In the year 2260, humanity had faced their first alien war. A species called the Courtney Swarm had attacked without warning. They were insect-like creatures with no interest in peace or negotiation. They only wanted to consume and expand. The war had lasted 5 terrible years. Earth had almost fallen 3 times. Billions of humans had died on colony worlds that were overrun by the swarm. In desperation, humanity's greatest scientists had created weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. She pointed to a row of missile systems. Those were quantum disruptors. They could tear apart the molecular bonds of any material, turning solid metal into dust in seconds. The Senate's shields had no defense against them. She pointed to another section. Those were antimatter cascade bombs. A single one could destroy an entire fleet if positioned correctly. They had never been used because the scientist has not finished testing them before the war ended. General Morrison asked how the war had ended. She had studied military history her whole life, but the records from that era were incomplete. Dr. Wright hesitated. Then she led them to the far end of the room, where a single device sat alone under a protective cover. It was smaller than the other weapons, about the size of a car, but it somehow looked more dangerous than everything else combined. She called it the Genesis Protocol. It was a weapon that could destabilize the core of a star, causing it to explode as a supernova. The scientists had built only one, and they had used it only once. Admiral Carter remembered his history lessons. The Courtney Swarm had been completely destroyed when their home star exploded. Everyone believed it was a natural event, a cosmic accident that happened to save humanity. But it had not been an accident at all. Dr. Wright nodded sadly. Humanity had killed an entire species to survive. Every Courtney in the galaxy, every egg, every colony, everything had been wiped out in a single moment. The scientists who created the weapon had been so horrified by what they had done that they sealed this facility and swore never to speak of it again. For 80 years, humanity had kept this secret. They had joined the galactic community, made friends and allies, and tried to be good neighbors. They had hoped they would never need these weapons again. But now, the Senate was forcing their hand. General Morrison was the first to speak. She said they could not use the Genesis Protocol again. It would be wrong, and it would prove everything the aliens believed about humans being dangerous monsters. Admiral Carter agreed. But he said they could use the other weapons. The quantum disruptors and the antimatter bombs would be enough to even the odds against the Senate. Fleet. Dr. Wright said she would begin reactivating the systems. It would take weeks to bring everything online, but they had 90 days. It was enough time. While this was happening underground, something else was happening across human space. The message had gone out through secret channels to every colony, every station, and every ship. Humanity was preparing for war. On a farming world called New Kansas, a man named Ryan Cooper received the message on his personal communicator. He was a simple farmer with rough hands and a sun-weathered face. But 30 years ago, he had been a soldier, and he had not forgotten his training. He gathered the other veterans in his community. There were 47 of them, men and women who had served in various conflicts over the years. They met in his barn that night and began planning how to turn their agricultural equipment into weapons. On the asteroid mining stations of the belt, Shift Supervisor Megan Torres read the same message. She was a young woman with dark hair and quick hands, known for her ability to fix any machine. Within hours, she had her crews converting mining lasers into weapons, platforms, and reinforcing their stations with extra armor. Plating. But perhaps the most important response came from Mars. In a small habitat dome on the edge of the Martian desert. A man named Scott Davis lived alone. He was old now, with white hair and trembling hands, but his mind was still sharp. He had been one of the scientists who created the Genesis Protocol, and the guilt had driven him into exile. When Admiral Carter's shuttle landed outside his dome, Scott already knew why they had come. He watched through his window as the Admiral walked toward his door, and he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Carter knocked and waited. After a long moment, Scott opened the door. The Admiral did not waste time with small talk. He explained the situation. The Senate was coming to destroy humanity. They needed every advantage they could get. And Scott Davis was the only person alive who truly understood the weapons in that mountain. Scott shook his head. He said he had spent decades trying to forget what he had done. He could not go back to that world of death and destruction. Carter pulled out a datapad and handed it to him. It contained intercepted communications from the Thalaxian government. Their real plans for humanity. Scott read slowly, and his face grew pale. The Thalaxians did not just want to disarm humanity. They planned to enslave them. Human workers would be sent to mine quantum crystals in terrible conditions. Human children would be taken from their families and raised to serve alien masters. Human culture, history, and identity would be erased until nothing remained. The old scientist sat down heavily. He stared at the data for a long time. Then he looked up at Admiral Carter with eyes that had found new purpose. He asked one question. How much time did they have? Carter told him 90 days. Maybe less if the Senate moved early. Scott nodded slowly. He said it was not much time, but it might be enough. He would need access to his old research, a full team of engineers, and complete authority over weapons development. Carter agreed to all of it. He held out his hand and Scott shook it. An old promise had been broken, but perhaps something new could be built from the pieces. As the Admiral's shuttle lifted off from Mars, carrying Scott Davis back to the war he had tried to escape. Humanity's secret preparations continued. In shipyards hidden from Senate sensors, new warships were being assembled. In laboratories across human space, scientists worked through the night on weapons and defenses. The clock was ticking, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The 90th day was approaching, and the galaxy watched with great interest. News channels on 100 worlds carried constant updates about the human situation. Most commentators agreed that the outcome was obvious. Humanity would surrender, or humanity would be destroyed. There was no third option. At the edge of human space, the Senate fleet gathered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Over 3,000 warships from 12 different species had assembled at a staging point just outside human territory. It was the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history. Fleet. Admiral Zixathi stood on the bridge of her flagship, a massive Valaxian battlecruiser called the Righteous Judgment. She was a reptilian creature with green scales and golden eyes that missed nothing. In her long career, she had fought in 17 major campaigns and had never tasted defeat. This mission, she believed, would be her easiest victory. She looked at the tactical display showing the human border and smiled with her thin lips. The humans had fewer than 200 ships. Even if they fought with the courage of madmen, they could not stop her fleet. The mathematics of war did not allow for miracles, but as the days passed, strange reports began reaching her command center. Her scouts reported that human colonies were not evacuating. This was unusual. When faced with overwhelming force, civilian populations normally fled to safety. Instead, human civilians were staying in place. Some were even moving toward the border, not away from it. Her intelligence officers reported that industrial output across human space had increased by 400%. Factories were running day and night. Mining operations had tripled their production. Something massive was being built, but her spies could not determine what. Most disturbing of all were the whispers from the outer regions of human territory. Her agents reported massive construction projects hidden from sensor scans. Thousands of workers had disappeared into secret facilities. Ships were moving through the darkness between stars, carrying unknown cargo to unknown destinations. Admiral HFY demanded answers, but none came. The humans had become very good at keeping secrets. On Earth, President Laura Mitchell prepared to address not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. Her speech would be broadcast on every frequency, translated into every language, and watched by trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. She stood in a simple room with a plain background. She had refused the advisors who wanted fancy graphics and dramatic music. She wanted the aliens to see her as she was, a human being speaking truth. The cameras activated, and she began. She spoke of humanity's history. She told the story of a species that had started as frightened creatures hiding in caves, afraid of the dark and the predators that lived within it. She described how those creatures had learned to make fire, to build shelters, to work together against the dangers of their world. She spoke of the long centuries of struggle, wars and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed humanity, but never did. Every time they were knocked down, they got back up. Every time they faced extinction, they found a way to survive. She spoke of the day when humans first left their planet and walked on their moon. She described the feeling of hope that had swept through their species, the knowledge that the universe was vast and full of wonders waiting to be discovered. And she spoke of the day they met other intelligent life. How excited they had been to join the galactic community. How much they had wanted to learn and share and grow alongside their new neighbors. Then her voice grew harder. She said that humanity had tried to be good members of the Senate. They had followed the rules. They had paid their dues. They had offered friendship to every species they met. And in return, they were threatened with enslavement. She looked directly into the camera, and her eyes were like steel. She said that humanity would not surrender. Not now, not ever. They had not clawed their way up from the mud to bow before tyrants. They had not crossed the void between stars to become slaves. If the Senate wanted a war, they would have one. And the galaxy would learn what humans were truly capable of when they had nothing left to lose. The transmission ended, and for a moment, there was silence across the stars. Then the response came. It came from the Galaxian channels, mocking the human president for her brave words and empty threats. It came from Senate politicians, dismissing her speech as the desperate noise of a doomed species. It came from military commanders, laughing at the idea that 200 ships could stop 3,000. But not everyone laughed. On the Galaxian flagship, Admiral HFY watched the speech 3 times. Something about the human leader's confidence bothered her. Presidents of doomed nations did not speak with such certainty. They begged. They bargained. They showed fear. Laura Mitchell had shown no fear at all. The Admiral called her senior officers to a private meeting. She ordered them to increase reconnaissance of human space. She wanted to know everything that was happening beyond that border. Something was wrong, and she intended to find out what. Meanwhile, Ambassador Nathan Cole returned to the Senate chambers on Valaxis Prime. He walked through the great halls where representatives from a dozen species watched him with curiosity and contempt. He was the voice of a doomed people, and everyone knew it. High Chancellor Zorvith received him in his private office. The Thalaxian leader was smiling, if you could call the expression on his gray face a smile. He asked if Cole had come to discuss terms of surrender. Nathan. Cole sat down across from the High Chancellor and crossed his legs calmly. He said he had not come to surrender. He had come to deliver a message. He handed over a small data chip. On it was humanity's official response to the Senate's ultimatum. The document was very short, containing only 7 words. We decline your generous offer of submission. Zorvith read the words, and his smile disappeared. His black eyes grew cold with anger. He said that humanity had just signed their own death warrant. When the 90 days ended, his fleet would destroy every human ship, burn every human colony, and teach the galaxy what happened to species that defied the Senate. Nathan Cole stood and adjusted his jacket. He looked at the High Chancellor with an expression that the alien could not read. He said that humanity had a saying on Earth. It was from an ancient warrior culture. And it went like this: "Come and take them." Then he turned and walked out of the office. Behind him, Zorvith was already giving orders to his commanders. The attack would begin the moment the deadline passed. No mercy, no prisoners. Complete destruction. But as Nathan Cole walked through the corridors of the Senate building, he was not worried. He knew what was waiting for the alien fleet when they crossed into human space. He had seen the reports from the secret shipyards, the messages from the hidden facilities, the progress updates from Dr. Wright and Scott Davis. The galaxy thought humanity was weak. They thought humans were afraid. They thought this war would be easy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On the final day before the deadline, Admiral Zixathi received one last intelligence report. Her scouts had detected a massive energy signature behind Mars, hidden by the planet's shadow. Something enormous was there, something her sensors could not fully identify. She stared at the data for a long time. Then she ordered her fleet to prepare for battle. Whatever the humans had built, it would not be enough to stop her. The sun set on the 90th day, and humanity held its breath. The waiting was over. The war was about to begin. The Senate fleet crossed into human space at exactly midnight on the 100th day. 3,000 warships moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons charged and their crews ready for battle. Admiral Zixathi watched from her command chair as the stars of human territory filled her view screen. The first resistance came at an outpost station on the border. A small group of human ships, perhaps 30 vessels, moved to block the advancing fleet. They fired their weapons bravely, but the outcome was never in doubt. Within minutes, most of them were destroyed. The survivors retreated deeper into human space. Zixathi allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The humans fought well, she admitted, but courage could not overcome numbers. Her fleet pushed forward, leaving the wreckage of the first battle behind. Over the next several hours, the pattern repeated. Human defense lines appeared, fought desperately, and then fell back. Each time, the Senate forces destroyed or disabled enemy ships. Each time, they pushed deeper into human territory. The first orbital stations fell without much resistance. Mining platforms in the asteroid belt were captured or destroyed. Colony worlds on the outer edge of human space sent surrender signals, and Zixathi ordered ground forces to secure them. Reports flowed into her command center from all sectors. The battle was going exactly as planned. Human losses were mounting while Senate casualties remained light. At this rate, the fleet would reach Earth itself within a week. Then they reached the Mars defense perimeter, and everything changed. Zixathi's tactical officer was the first to notice something wrong. He reported new contacts appearing on sensors, emerging from behind the red planet. At first, he thought it was a mistake. The numbers could not be correct. The Admiral ordered him to verify his readings. He did, and his face went pale. 500 warships were rising from behind Mars. They were larger than any human vessels previously encountered, bristling with weapons and protected by thick armor plating. Where had they come from? How had humans built so many ships in secret? But the real shock came when the final vessel emerged from Mars's shadow. It was a ship, so massive that Zixathi's sensors had trouble measuring it. Twice the length of her own flagship, it seemed to fill the entire view screen. Its hull was covered with weapon emplacements, shield generators, and systems that her computers could not identify. The USS Constellation, humanity's first and only Dreadnought-class battleship. The secret project that had consumed all of their hidden resources, all of their desperate planning, all of their determination to survive. Admiral Daniel Carter's voice crackled across all communication frequencies. He addressed the Senate fleet calmly, without anger or hatred. He said that humanity did not want this war. They had never wanted it. But they would not surrender their freedom, their families, or their future. He offered the Senate fleet one chance to withdraw. Turn around, go home, and tell the High Chancellor that humanity was not to be conquered. Do this, and no more lives needed to be lost. Zixathi listened to his words with growing disbelief. The human commander was outnumbered 6-1, even with his reinforcements. He should be begging for mercy, not offering terms. Did he not understand the mathematics of the situation? She opened her own communication channel and laughed at his offer. She said that humans were brave fools who did not know when they were beaten. Her fleet would destroy his new ships just as they had destroyed the others. Surrender now, and she might spare some of his people. Admiral Carter was silent for a moment. Then he said something that Zixathi would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "You have no idea what you're facing." The battle began. The first wave of Senate ships charged forward, confident in their superior numbers. They launched missiles and fired energy beams at the human fleet. Their captains expected to see enemy shields flicker and fail under the assault. Instead, the human ships activated defensive systems that the Senate had never encountered. The attacks splashed harmlessly against energy barriers that seemed to absorb and redirect the incoming fire. Not a single human vessel was damaged. Then the humans returned. Dr. Samantha Wright had spent weeks reactivating the quantum disruptors, and now her work proved its worth. Beams of twisted light reached out from human ships and touched Senate vessels. Wherever they hit, solid matter simply stopped existing. Armor, shields, hull plating, everything turned to dust and scattered into the void. The first Senate squadron vanished in seconds. 30 ships, gone without even having time to send a distress signal. Admiral Zixathi watched in horror as her tactical display turned red with damage reports. She ordered her fleet to fall back and regroup, but the humans did not give them time. The Constellation fired its main cannon, a weapon powered by a small star contained within the ship's core. A beam of pure white light crossed the distance between the fleets in an instant. It struck Zixathi's sister ship, the Thalaxian battlecruiser Divine Judgment, and the entire vessel exploded in a flash of nuclear fire. 1,000 crew members died without knowing what had killed them. Panic spread through the Senate fleet. Ships that had never retreated from any enemy began turning and running. Commanders screamed conflicting orders into their communication systems. The perfect formation collapsed into chaos. But in the middle of the disaster, Zixathi kept her head. She was a veteran of 17 campaigns, and she would not let fear control her. She rallied her remaining forces and organized a desperate counterattack, trying to buy time for the rest of the fleet to escape. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. When it was over, more than 2,000 Senate ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors were scattered and running, their proud fleet reduced to frightened remnants. The largest military force in galactic history had been broken in less than an hour. And then something happened that shocked the galaxy even more than the battle itself. Admiral Carter ordered his fleet to stop firing. He sent rescue ships to help disabled enemy vessels. He instructed his crews to recover escape pods from both sides. Medical teams were deployed to provide aid to wounded alien soldiers. Zixathi's own flagship had been badly damaged in the fighting. Her engines were dead, her weapons were offline, and her life support was failing. She expected the humans to leave her to die, or perhaps to come and execute her as an example. Instead, a human shuttle docked with her ship. Emergency repair teams came aboard and stabilized her life support. Medical personnel treated her wounded crew. And then Admiral Carter himself walked onto her bridge. She faced him with what dignity she could muster. She was a prisoner now, and she expected to be treated as one. She asked if he had come to gloat over his victory. Carter shook his head. He said that he had not come to gloat. He had come to ask her a question. He asked her why. Why had the Senate decided to destroy humanity? What had they done to deserve extinction? Zixathi did not know how to answer. She had followed orders. She had believed what the High Chancellor told her. She had thought humans were dangerous animals that needed to be controlled. Carter sat down across from her. He looked tired, she realized. Tired and sad, not triumphant. He said that humanity did not want to be the galaxy's enemy. They wanted to be friends, partners, equals. But they could not be slaves. They would die first. He asked her if she understood that now. Zixathi thought about the battle. She thought about the weapons that had torn her fleet apart. She thought about the mercy that had been shown to her defeated soldiers. She realized that she had underestimated humanity completely. Not just their technology, but their spirit. They fought like demons, but showed compassion like saints. They were capable of creating weapons that could destroy stars. Yet they chose to save their enemies instead of killing them. She nodded slowly. She said that she understood. Carter stood up. He said that the war was over. Humanity would not invade Senate space or seek revenge. But things would have to change. The old ways of the galaxy, where the strong dominated the weak, could not continue. He offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her scales felt strange against his soft human skin, but somehow it felt right. The Battle of Mars was over. Now came the harder task of building peace. The news of the Battle of Mars spread across the galaxy like a wildfire. Within hours, every species in the Senate knew what had happened. The mighty fleet that was supposed to crush humanity had been destroyed in less than an hour. The weapons that were supposed to guarantee victory had been useless against human technology. Everything they believed about their own power had been wrong. High Chancellor Zorvith received the reports in his private chambers on Valaxis Prime. As he read the details of the disaster, his gray face grew paler and paler. 2,000 ships destroyed. Admiral Zixathi captured. The human fleet intact and now the most powerful force in known space. He expected the humans to come for revenge. He expected them to do what the Thalaxians would have done. Attack the weakened Senate worlds, conquer their enemies, and establish a new empire with Earth at its center. He began preparing evacuation plans and emergency defenses, but the human response was not what anyone expected. President Laura Mitchell sent Ambassador Nathan Cole back to the Senate chambers with a message. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a threat of invasion. It was an invitation. Humanity proposed a meeting. All 12 Senate species would send representatives to a neutral location. There, they would discuss a new future for the galaxy. A future built on cooperation instead of domination, on equality instead of hierarchy, on trust instead of fear. The other species were confused. This was not how victors behaved. When you had the power to crush your enemies, you crushed them. That was the way of the galaxy. That was how things had always been done. But they had no choice. The Senate fleet was gone. Their military power was broken. If humans wanted to talk, they would have to listen. The meeting took place on a small moon at the edge of neutral space. Representatives from all 12 Senate species gathered in a simple conference room. At the head of the table sat President Mitchell and Ambassador Cole. Behind them stood Admiral Carter, a reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed. Mitchell spoke first. She thanked everyone for coming and acknowledged that the past weeks had been difficult for all sides. Lives had been lost. Trust had been broken. Old wounds had been opened. But she said that humanity was not interested in revenge. They had proven they could defend themselves. They had proven they could not be conquered. Now they wanted to prove something else. They wanted to prove they could help build a better galaxy. She presented humanity's proposal. The old Senate would be dissolved. In its place, they would create something new, the United Galactic Federation. Every species would have equal representation, regardless of military strength or economic power. Decisions would be made through consensus, not domination. Trade would be free and fair. Disputes would be resolved through negotiation, not war. The representatives listened in silence. Some looked skeptical. Some looked interested. Some looked afraid. The Thalaxian representative spoke up. He asked what would happen to the species that had tried to destroy humanity. Would there be punishment? Would there be occupation? Mitchell shook her head. She said there would be no punishment. The past was the past. What mattered now was the future they would build together. She did add one condition. High Chancellor Zorvith would step down from his position. He had led the Senate toward war and conquest for too long. New leadership was needed. Leadership that believed in the principles of the new federation. The Thalaxian representative nodded slowly. This was a price they could pay. One by one, the other representatives agreed to the proposal. Some did so eagerly, especially the smaller species who had long suffered under Thalaxian control. Others did so reluctantly, knowing they had no other choice. But in the end, all 12 species signed the founding charter of the United Galactic Federation. In the following months, the galaxy transformed. Trade routes that had been blocked for centuries opened up. Species that had been enemies for generations began talking to each other. Scientists shared their knowledge freely, and technology advanced faster than ever before. On Earth, the changes were equally dramatic. The secret weapons facility beneath the Rocky Mountains was open to Federation inspectors. Dr. Samantha Wright led teams of scientists from multiple species through the corridors, showing them what humanity had built in their desperation to survive. Most of the weapons were dismantled. The quantum disruptors, the antimatter bombs, the terrible tools of war that had saved humanity, would never be used again. They were melted down, repurposed, transformed into instruments of peace. But the Genesis Protocol received special attention. Scott Davis, the old scientist who had come out of exile to help his species, personally supervised its destruction. He watched as the device that could kill stars was taken apart piece by piece, its components scattered and neutralized. When it was done, he sat alone in his laboratory for a long time. He thought about the choices he had made in his life. The weapon he had helped create had killed an entire species and saved another. The guilt would never fully leave him, but perhaps now he could find some peace. Admiral Carter retired from military service. He had fought enough battles for one lifetime. Instead, he accepted a position at the Federation's new Joint Military Academy, where young officers from all species would learn to work together. He taught them strategy and tactics, but more importantly, he taught them honor and mercy. Admiral Zixathi, the veteran commander who had led the Senate fleet to defeat, surprised everyone with her next decision. After her release from human custody, she applied to become the new High Chancellor of what remained of the Thalaxian government. She had seen what mercy looked like, and she wanted to bring that lesson to her own people. Her application was accepted. The Thalaxians, humbled by defeat, were ready for change. Under her leadership, they began transforming from conquerors into partners. On the first anniversary of the Battle of Mars, President Mitchell gave her final address as Earth's leader. Her term was ending, and she had chosen not to seek another. The job of leading humanity through crisis was done. Now it was time for new voices to guide them forward. She spoke to a crowd of millions, gathered in cities across Earth and human colonies. She spoke to billions more watching from Federation worlds across the galaxy. Her words were translated into 100 languages and heard by species that, 1 year ago had been enemies. She said that humanity had proven many things in the past year. They had proven they could build weapons of terrible power. They had proven they could defeat any enemy that came against them. They had proven they could stand alone against the galaxy and survive. But none of those things were what made her proud. What made her proud was what humanity had done after the battle. They had shown mercy to defeated enemies. They had offered friendship instead of demanding submission. They had used their victory not to build an empire, but to build a community. The galaxy had tried to destroy humanity because they feared what humans might become. Now the galaxy could see what humanity actually was, a species that fought for survival, forgave its enemies, and dreamed of a future where all beings could live together in peace. She ended with words that would be remembered for generations. She said that humanity had proven they could win any war. Now it was time to prove they could win the peace. The crowd cheered, and the sound echoed across the stars in the Federation chambers on Valaxis Prime. High Chancellor Zixathi called the assembled delegates to order. Representatives from 13 species, including humanity, took their seats. For the first time in galactic history, every voice had equal weight. Every vote counted the same at the back of the chamber. Ambassador Nathan Cole watched with quiet satisfaction. He remembered standing in this same room 1 year ago, delivering humanity's refusal to surrender. He remembered the anger on Zorvith's face, the certainty that humans would be destroyed. Now Zorvith was gone, and the galaxy was free. Cole thought about the long road that had brought them here, the fear and the hope, the battles and the negotiations, the enemies who had become friends. The Senate had tried to disarm humanity because they thought weapons were the source of human strength. They had been wrong. Human strength came from something deeper, the refusal to give up, the willingness to fight for what was right, and the wisdom to know when fighting was over. The galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way. But they had learned it, and that was what mattered. As the first session of the Reformed Federation began, Cole smiled and took his seat among the delegates. The future was uncertain, as it always was. There would be challenges ahead, disagreements and difficulties and moments of doubt. But for the first time in galactic history, every species faced that future together. Not as rulers and subjects, not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals. And that was humanity's greatest victory of all.